Hey everybody, welcome back to our presidential podcast special. My name is Patrick Tan, General Counsel for ChatArgos. If you're wondering where I'm wearing sunglasses, it's not because I've gone full crypto bro. I've just been to the eye doctor, and this is where we're at
The
now.
blinding lights, yeah.
So with me, as usual, every week, our CEO and Chief Data Scientist, John and Reiter. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for all the likes, comments. We can't get to all of the requests for the show, and this show is going to be all about the new U.S. president and what that means for crypto. Here's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to be talking about Trump's campaign promises, and you'll find that they're surprisingly easy to achieve.
So some of them, yeah. So this is not political in the sense that we're not expressing any views in any direction, but we're going to talk about what seems like stuff he can just do easily that isn't going to have resistance. Politicians in that sense are all kind of all the same.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about mining incentives, surveillance CBDCs, not selling CBDC, Ross Ulbricht, and what we think is going to happen. Now, again, for those of you who are fans of the show, you'll know this. There are certain things that we don't express opinions on. We've been very careful about that. One is if any of these things are securities. We repeatedly...
Well, we've sometimes had in specific cases, but in general...
in general, we don't really express strong opinions on that. And more importantly, this show is apolitical. So all we're going to be talking about is the practical implications of a Trump administration and some of the top few promises he's made to the crypto bros. So, John, if you will, take it away.
So I think the first thing that he's talked about, and that there is also... So the Republicans now have not complete control over the government, but
absolute power.
A lot of ability to make changes to things, right? So there are a couple of things that people have talked about off the bat, actually that have nothing to do necessarily, that Trump wasn't the leader in that space, wasn't the first person to say. So the first one, I think, really is this CBDC surveillance type stuff, along with allowing self-custody. It doesn't seem like there's a meaningful constituency that wants to implement a heavy surveillance CBDC. Like, people talk about how that could, in theory, maybe be done, but no one from any major central bank has, anywhere in the world, other than I think the Chinese stuff is maybe a little bit different in this space, but in a major Western non-capital control. It's the capital control part that's important, also not the politics, that has talked about that at all, right? So, yeah, I think you could easily get a coalition that would pass a law that said, it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment or whatever.
Yeah.
The government should not do this, and it's not a thing that anybody's pushing hard to do. So you're not going to get resistance. That's an easy win you can give to people.
I would be surprised if somebody were to form a lobby. Let's make America more like George Orwell's 1984 again. I would be surprised to see that.
I think they would not be able to sustain resistance to win the votes at this point anyway, but also, yeah, there isn't a loud constituency.
It just doesn't seem, yeah.
You can argue some of the banking people maybe a little bit would at least like some powers. We'll come to that one in a few minutes. I think that maybe that space will experience less change because, again, next thing that he can sort of really easily achieve, there's been a lot of discussion, Bitcoin should be made in the USA. So in practice, what that probably means is various tax breaks and incentives for mining. All right. So that's a thing that, again, the Republicans have sufficient control over the government to pass to pass the budget they want. So those mining incentives will now go into the process that is the federal budgeting procedure. No one promises specific handouts because the budgeting process just doesn't ever work that way. But it seems likely that the result of a few years of this group making budget decisions, they'll have at least two. Man, the elections in 2026 could change some things, whatever, House control at that point. So that we can imagine that something related to proof of work type mining incentives will probably be part of the federal budget process for a long time. Right? In dollar terms, it's not clear how large that would be. Again, lots of companies and lobbyists and supporters are competing for various types of tax expenditure is the term, money given out to people through tax abatements of various sorts. And you'd maybe some of the state governments that they now have more control over and are more sort of au fait with this kind of stuff will hand out more of that sort of tax incentive. But that's going to be an argument among a lot of people. It's interesting. That almost certainly is meaningful as far as the mining stock prices are concerned and various things associated with the mining space.
But not likely to have a whole bunch of action on the price,
It's not clear. Yeah, it's not like when a mining company comes out and announces a big capital raise. Because, again, these companies are constantly raising capital. Right? All the mining companies forever have been constantly raising capital. They announce a successful capital raise. It doesn't cause meaningful price changes. It flows in and out. So maybe you'd have a small headlines type move, but that's a very much a buy the rumor, sell the fact type situation because there's no these companies do not spend the money on Bitcoin. They spend the money on hardware to then go mine Bitcoin. In some vague sense, that's aggregating value into the system, but very, very, very slowly. It's not like, the ETF thing, at least in theory, allowed a bunch of new people to put money in if they wanted to, at least in a different way. The tax abatement for that is just giving money to the people who run, manage, in many cases lent money to, invested money in those companies. And that's probably easy enough to pull off. He might even be able to go to some states where his margins, where Republican margins weren't so huge, and announce joint deals with local governments there that are aligned with him and interested in his views now. This is not saying these are good or bad or whatever. These are classic politics, right? Classic politics. So the best thing he can do for the politicians that will, continue to be in office after he's retired, is to support them, give them assistance to increase their margins. That's what the party wants. That's what the whole group wants. So he would go line up and try to help people who are in marginal seats, right? So if you won by 70% Trump margin, you're far less likely to get one of these tax incentives than if you're based in a state that's marginal, where he thinks he can inject some money and generate some job headline about tax, whatever, something useful for people. That's politically much more complicated, right? The federal budget process is a long, complicated mess, but this will be in that, and presumably something will be done. And people who complain that they didn't get everything they wanted in the first year will just have their lobbyists tell them to grow up.
Yep.
Because that's every industry wants stuff, and that this is every country, right? That's the way that goes.
Everybody wants everything everywhere all at once.
Yeah. Now, there are two things here that are extremely simple for him to do. Right. One of them is the thing about not selling seized Bitcoin. So the government has. I mean the government broadly, so state governments, various agencies, the federal government, all kinds of stuff, have Bitcoin that they have seized and are government property, in the sense that, you shut down a drug dealer, you take their stuff, you seize them, you auction off the Lamborghinis or whatever. And then there's things that the U.S. trustee holds on behalf of people, bankrupt estates, hand back to victims, that kind of thing. So the second one, you give the stuff back. It's the government's, but in a transitory sense. The first pile, the stuff that's been seized, and the government has a bit over 200,000 Bitcoin, I think, in total, in the category now. He can just issue an executive order saying, don't sell it. All right. That's not going to last forever. That can be reversed by a future president. He could even pass a law saying you can't sell it. That would be, a bit harder to pull off, and probably not something anybody wants, because the government in general doesn't want to prevent itself from, in order to reverse the law, they'd have to have enough sufficient majorities in Congress to reverse the law. Whereas an executive order, one of the reasons presidents like executive orders is that they can just do them, so they can take credit for them, right? And then if necessary, they can just undo them. So they don't have a problem. They don't get blamed, right? No one wants to prevent a certain type of spending, and then when it's difficult to turn that spigot back on, get blamed for causing that problem. So this is a great one where he can very easily say, don't sell it, executive order, whatever, job done. It's hard to see why he wouldn't do that, because it's free and it requires no one's agreement. The next entry on the list of things he can pull off for free with angering almost, if not actually no one, is Ross Ulbricht. Right, so commuting the sentence shouldn't really anger much of anybody.
He's been inside for a while.
It's not clear whether pardoning him would make some people in law enforcement unhappy, but commuting his sentence, it seems, would definitely be safe all over the place.
It's also important to remember that he didn't pardon Giuliani.
Yeah, so he does not have a history of handing lots of pardons out to lots of people. I mean, this was a whole thing at the end of his last term, who he wasn't pardoning.
He didn't pardon any family even.
The rest of it. There wasn't so much pardoning going on. But this one is something he's promised explicitly, and he has completely unfettered power on. Really, just like the executive order, he can just say, don't do this, or let this guy out of prison, and job done.
Yeah, I mean, committing a sentence is...
That's a totally standard within his... If one of the thing you say in your stump speech routinely is you're going to commute X guy's sentence, and then you win the election, everybody expects you to do it, and frankly, nobody can be angry at you if you do it at that point, because it's
honestly
ridiculous. Now, if he frees a whole bunch of random other people, there may be no, but this is the process, right? You win, you get that kind of stuff. So those are things that he can do very easily. So now we're going to come to some stuff that's a bit more complicated. First, I'm going to say another thing he hasn't said, but that I think will happen, is putting up some sort of advisory committee to help deal with some of this crypto, blockchain, decentralized finance regulation, whatever, because one of the main demands is changing the way the SEC works and a lot of these other things. We'll come to that stuff in 1 second. It is cheap, if not free, for him to set up a presidential blue ribbon advisory
yeah.
commission or something, to look at this stuff and invite a bunch of people who are happy to do it, and then take a fairly long time working through that process. That's also pretty standard. It used to be the case that people do this for the pension system and whatnot fairly often. It's usually done as a way of avoiding responsibility for making statements people don't want to hear. It may turn out in this case that those statements are things that, let's say they come out with a collection of policies. There's no way that those policies will be 100% acceptable to any interest group, right? The people who greatly dislike this stuff, the people who love this stuff are not going to like 100% of those policies, because that's not how, the Fed chairman will be on the committee. It's an appointee of whatever, it will work like that. So there will be some, resistance in various directions. But if he can come up with a collection of people that are now have their names on this thing, and after 18 months or whatever, come up with some basic policies that the crypto people who supported him feel like meet 2/3, whatever, of their demands, and nobody else is extremely angry. Everybody else feels like they got, 20%, 30%, 40%. That's got to be kind of a win. And that's a standard thing. It also takes... he doesn't want to make these policy decisions day to day. The president never wants to be the one making these low-level, maybe Bill Clinton, but don't want to make these low-level policy decisions all the time. So that's an easy thing that has not been proposed, but something like that seems likely. And then this comes in because he's talked about getting rid of Gensler and overhauling the way the SEC works.
Gensler doesn't have much time left to go anyway.
Yeah, so this is an interesting thing. So the way the SEC is set up, there are 5 commissioners, and they are on staggered 5-year terms. So everybody comes off at once, and I believe you can have 2 terms. Actually, an aunt of mine was a commissioner, so I knew this fairly well from when I attended her swearing in a long time ago. That was in the George W. Bush administration, so it's a long time ago. It's very, very difficult for him to just outright fire this guy because the SEC is a somewhat independent agency.
Yep.
It's not like finance minister, foreign minister type equivalents where he can just say you're out and you're out, right?
It's not a cabinet
just
position.
say you're out, right? Well, it's not that it's not a cabinet position. I mean, it is in fact not a cabinet.
It is
position.
not a cabinet position.
But it's legally they don't just serve directly for the president. The SEC, like a lot of other federal agencies and commissions, are designed to be somewhat independent of the operation of the government. Clearly something that's set up with 5 commissioners, one of which comes off each year, was designed to be, somewhat independent of the political process. Now, it is possible, if he can claim enough whatever bad behavior, to actually fire him. I will also note that the standard procedure on the SEC is that you have 3 commissioners from one party and 2 from the other party.
Yep.
So Gensler would be replaced with someone who was acceptable to Democrats. Trying to upend that is really aggressive, right? Trying to upend that is a huge attack on the way things work, because lots of agencies work this way, where whoever the president is going to end up with the majority running that commission, but they're all odd numbers and it's a 1/over type majority. And they work that way for a reason. Again, these things are designed to be staggered and forced rotation. It's not like federal judges. Here it's, 2 terms, 5-year terms, staggered 5 commissioners, 5 years, separate years coming off. It's worked this way for 90 years. So I'm not sure he would try to go really hard on that one, because there's not much point.
It's almost at its end.
He can just say, don't pursue this area.
Yeah.
This is the new chairman. Deprioritize that, and then just let that kind of spin through.
Yeah.
And that's specifically with respect to the securities stuff. Given the number of things he can give to his constituents, it feels unlikely. The specific, the crypto whatever constituency, the people who are asking for this stuff, we've just spent, almost 15 minutes rattling off things that he can just do.
Yeah.
Either just straight up do, or he's got enough sway within the Republican Party to get done, right? The budget stuff he can't do outright, but he can get done. So it feels like maybe at that point he's done. I think this is maybe a very marginally political position, but the man at that point will have.
We'll head off to Bitminster.
Well, yeah, I was going to say he will have sort of satisfied more campaign promises to one particular group than any leader I can remember.
That's a good point.
I mean, if he pulls that off, these people have gotten. By these people, I mean the group that we're talking about here that has supported Trump to do whatever crypto stuff. He's given that group really, really, really kind treatment by historical standards. Nobody gets that many things done. Now, to be fair, in this case, it's a bit rare in the 2 things they want: the Ulbricht thing and the
CBDC thing.
No, the the not selling seized Bitcoin. Those are just single executive order in question, and with no meaningful resistance. So they're going to this constituency will get more than most constituencies are given, but they're also asking for things that mechanically are quite easy in this case, right? If you look at, for example, some of the Democratic supporter side stuff in this space that wanted far more, the Elizabeth Warren consumer protection, crypto banning, banking type stuff, not in the traditional banking regulator space. I'll come to it in 1 second, but generically, and selling this stuff to people is a bad idea. A lot of what they wanted, what that group wanted, is maybe more difficult to enforce. Is messier, right? There's nothing that Warren has proposed that is really just a single. I mean, I guess you could issue an executive order that says don't let people buy crypto, but that's just stupid. I mean, that's not going to do anything. There's no one-liners type order type stuff on that side. Now, in that vein, we come to sort of the space where stuff is a lot harder. There have been issues, confrontations between the government and the crypto community about various banking-related issues. The banking regulators, the Federal Reserve System, is a great example of something that's way more independent of government than the SEC even. It's much harder for the president to get involved in that stuff. It's considered outright inappropriate or just not allowed in some cases.
He never mentioned any of that stuff.
Well, yeah, so he's made no commitments about changing any of the banking stuff, changing anybody on that side, and those are bigger fights.
Yes.
Right? Similarly, he's mentioned SEC. Gensler repeatedly hasn't said anything about CFTC, various other agencies. There have been more than 0 comments. I mean, it's not a repeated stump speech, proper promise. Politicians say a lot of stuff once. Nobody takes that seriously. So it doesn't seem like you're going to have much of a fight on that side, right? The generic FinCEN banking CFTC type space, which I'm not even sure people resist at this point. They're just accepting to do this stuff outside the U.S.
No talk about DeFi as well.
Yeah, that's what the next thing I'm going to come to. I'm not aware of any meaningful discussion there that's DeFi related. People simply want to stop the securities actions out of the SEC. So I think that gives you a contour for what, you probably won't see $3 million fine for some NFT project that do influence or whatever. Shutting that down is reasonably doable, and I'm not sure there's a massive constituency opposed to stopping that anyway. Clearly the people bringing the actions thought they were bad, right? But they take their prioritization decisions from the political leadership, so that's the end of that. The political leadership isn't going to want to prioritize that. But you look at sort of the mixer things, the Bitcoin mixer convictions and cases and whatnot have been reasonably consistent for the last decade.
Yeah.
Pre-Trump's first term, there was stuff going on there. So I wouldn't expect any of that to change. The banking stuff, similarly, the reaction to the Synapse explosion and the subsequent discovery that a lot of domestic U.S. banking stuff, fintech, banking as a service, that whole space generically, has a lot of issues. I don't think you're going to find a constituency that's sort of in favor of allowing that to continue, right? And they can also somewhat wash their hands of it. The political leadership, wash their hands of it by saying these are independent agencies. The Federal Reserve can go off and do whatever. Now, as far as this choke point stuff was concerned and, going after the Fed for selectively enforcing against certain, probably there will be a discussion somewhere somebody will ask for, but you can't have particularly forceful conversations with the Fed like that. And if you read a lot of these settlements, you see absolutely egregious behavior, and the result is a consent order to stop doing it within 3 months. There may be a little bit of pushback for, if you really want us to reduce that, that's fine. We'll have, 1/3 the number of prosecutions, but then there'll be criminal prosecutions. So I think people should be careful how they push in that direction, because if you really tell the Fed, you should only go after cases that you think are particularly egregious, great, we'll reduce the number of cases we go after and refer them all to the FBI. Which is a thing, right? Some of these banks and banking as a service will result in criminal prosecutions and have. The TD Bank laundering thing similarly, right? Nobody's happy with the way that stuff's going, so you're likely to see fallout on both directions, and which people get caught is always pretty random. It's the way this goes.
No, I know.
Right? It's the way this goes. But that's it. So what we've got here is a whole spectrum of things, from something Trump has explicitly promised repeatedly and can do with either no consultation with anybody else at all, like commuting Ulbricht's sentence, or can definitely get something done because him and his party have sufficient control over parts of the government, Bitcoin mining incentives, generically, right? And then you work all the way to the other end of the spectrum where, dramatically changing the way the entire regulatory state approaches not just the securities part of crypto, but the stablecoin part of crypto, the payments part of crypto, the payments part of fintech. Those just feel like much, much heavier lifts that'll be super. Why would they focus on that when they have so many things they can give people fairly easily? So I think if you're a Bitcoin maxi, if you're very much a Bitcoin mining stockholder, a big Bitcoin person, a lot of what's happening here probably is very beneficial in that space.
Yeah.
At least for the mining stocks, if not the token. Financially, is anything going to happen because of laws passed protecting self-custody? I don't think so. The First Amendment does a pretty good job protecting basic Bitcoin, write your own wallet self-custody in the first place. If you're a DeFi person who thinks that, a centralized DEX with admin keys should be fine, even if it's processing stablecoins, that hasn't come up in the campaign for a reason, right? And I think that there's probably going to be zero action in that space, right? There will be a wholesale change to the way U.S. banks deal with customer KYC and outsourcing of services, not even anything to do with crypto because of Synapse, right? And some of what was happening at some of these banks that did both, right? In many cases, banks that exploded. Evolve was doing some crypto business and was doing some Synapse business, and it doesn't matter which one caught fire because then you look inside and it's all cockroaches, right? So that stuff will change one way or another, probably in ways that make 100% legit crypto activities a little bit easier and make more gray area stuff probably harder, alongside with just introducing frictions for the purpose of slowing things down on purpose, because Synapse was a proper train wreck.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
I think that's fair.
I think that's fair. So we'll see. It doesn't seem like he'd want to pick a fight with prosecutors by just saying, discontinue the cases against. Well, for example, the Alex Mashinsky thing, in principle, he could tell him discontinue.
Yeah, he could.
Why would you want to?
Yeah.
You've got enough stuff to give people. They donated and supported, whatever it is, politics. I don't see why, no matter how you feel about some of these things, why you would get involved in that.
It would also interfere with the tea time, so.
Well, look, this is marginally political again, but the idea that the man gives a bunch of things to supporters and then goes a little bit Eisenhower.
Yeah.
And hands off the reins of this to a number of other people who, look, he's almost 80. No one's judging.
I do.
You do you, dude.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like engaging in unnecessary fights. Now, to be fair, I will acknowledge that historically Donald Trump has loved engaging in unnecessary fights. Him in the New York Post, I'm a Post reader from long before he was a political figure, right? Is a thing he enjoys. But
he likes golf more.
Well, and he likes having high-profile fights with celebrities.
Yes.
I don't think having an argument with some random part of the Justice Department, the Treasury Department,
From Machinsky?
Health and Human Services. I mean, if he really puts Robert F. Kennedy Jr. in at Health and Human Services, there will be noise.
Yeah.
He's not going to want to be involved in that.
He actually said that.
Yeah, you do you.
He
right?
said that
you go take
in
care
a
of it.
speech. He said, you go take care of it, except for the oil. I don't give a shit.
He's made clear that a number of these things will be handed off to other people and they want to hear about it. And those people are not going to have the ability to. Changes within a certain scope will be easy. Changes outside that scope will be hard. There you go. Also, a lot of these people are not experienced in running government, so very much you're going to be looking at, and this is exactly what we're saying about the Trump policies. Path of least resistance is a great way to figure out what politicians will do. No downside, not a lot of effort, don't have to expend political capital, make the people who got you there happy. Tick off enough of those boxes and then move on to the next thing.
Move on to something else.
Of course, he's got the crypto people note how many times these issues were mentioned late in the campaign speeches on either side. Think we're looking at a zero for major speeches. We're not looking at a zero total, but for major speeches. So these are not going to be the top of the list. He specifically called the oil out. Right?
Yeah, he called the oil out.
He didn't call any of the financial stuff out. So, the Bitcoin thing he's talked about, repeatedly, but not headline. If that was mentioned in the victory speech, you'd have expected more aggressive policy.
Yeah.
You'd expect some, as far as tax abatements and development credits are concerned, it sounds like oil and gas will be getting more Bitcoin, given he named that. This is how you read these things.
Yeah.
So, get in line.
A lot of mention about oil and gas.
You're not at the front of the line. Get in line.
Well, I mean, at least you're in the line.
No, that's what we're saying. These people will be given what they asked for. And the group of people that...
Promises made, promises kept.
The people that... with him, with everybody, you get more than zero, and you get less than all of them.
Yep.
And you're probably going to get the ones that don't cost them as much.
I mean, that's just life.
That's the way politics works.
Indeed. So,
Yeah, so I think the summary of that one is good for Bitcoin mining stocks, maybe. I don't know. That's certainly not an investment advice.
Yeah.
But otherwise, doesn't seem like massive price impact for lots of things. I mean, if they do decide to do something regarding DeFi and saying these things are exempt, whatever,
maybe.
then you'd see it. But I just don't see why.
I don't see
it
why you
hasn't
would pick
come
that
up
fight,
at all.
yeah.
So now you may get some discussion of that by some people a year from now.
Maybe.
Right. But again, as is normally the case, the Republicans who control all three branches of government are not going to continue to control all three of them after the next election. That's normally how this goes.
And also, these things seem to, like, this is getting down to the weeds, which I just don't
yeah,
see them.
they want to focus on not getting
This is like
destroyed too badly in
the
2026.
minutiae of the everyday that, although, granted, the crypto bros care a lot about these things, and I just don't see mainstream politicians caring all that much.
Well, the goal is to retain the House majority in 2026.
Which will be tough.
So it's a question of whether or not you think your issues help them to retain the House majority in 2026. And, I mean, I'm not a politics expert to know which districts are at risk or whatever. But if it turns out that this stuff is very important in those districts, great.
Maybe.
It is kind of somewhat amusing to me in that all of the crypto companies moving to Texas, lots of businesses, in fact, have relocated to Texas. Lots of Trump-supporting businesses have relocated to Texas. But, of course, then they have very little sway in districts outside of Texas that are already extremely... fair enough. In fact, there were some companies that relocated from New York where, at least in principle, they could talk to local politicians about creating jobs in the area, and you could flip that one in that direction. Texas is fully flipped, has been for most of our lifetimes. So I don't know. The local house races thing is interesting. What will and won't turn out to be an issue. Anyway, that's more general politics. We're not. Yeah.
And this is not a political show.
And these are unlikely to be issues in that race unless somebody gives an exemption to someone that blows up in their face. It's hard to see how else it would matter.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It just seems too small.
No, I agree. I agree. They need a strategy that works across that collection of House races to fend off the Democrats taking back, as they normally,
I can't imagine this would ever become an issue.
I can't see this mattering. I can't see this mattering. Yeah.
So, but on that note, there you go. That's the election special episode. However it turned out for you, I hope you make your peace with it. And on that note...
well, you celebrate. Make your peace.
Make your peace.
Do what you do.
You do you.
You do you. But, no, it's important. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand how the U.S. government's very complicated on purpose, but whatever.
Well, I mean, quarts, pints, except for...
Okay, the unit system is stupid and separate. If they could pass a law switching to the metric system, there's no support for that, but that would be fantastic.
We do use the metric system only for the sports that people don't care about, like swimming and running.
I mean, there's several rulers that have on both sides. Anyway.
There's some very, very fine measurements on both sides. I guess we can say that now. And on that note, thank you for tuning in. We will see you again next week. Thanks for tuning in to the
and we'll have
presidential
data next week.
election special.
We'll
see you guys.